There's so many historical mementos behind him. He is a giant in the world of sports media and storytelling. And one of the more notable things I see in this picture, two bleacher seats. And then I think to myself, the Oakland A's just had their last game and fans were caught taking the seats. Chip Rives, president director of Texas Crew Productions. Do you have something to explain here to us here on the Onto Something podcast? I'm Brian Fenley.
Yeah, yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Brian. I've been a fan of the podcast. You've interviewed a lot of people that I look up to, and a lot of people that I started off in the industry with. But just to, full disclaimer, these were purchased by the Houston Sports Authority. We were doing our documentary about the Houston Astrodome, the eighth wonder of the world. I came about these honestly. These are actual chairs from the Houston Astrodome. And if you were to pour truth serum in me, you would realize that one of the places where I would love to have my ashes buried is in the Houston Astrodome. It's where I became a sports fan. It's where I learned, um, how painful it is to be a sports fan. It's also where I learned probably that I wasn't equipped to play in the Houston Astrodome. So I needed to have a different path in life. But those are actual dirty mementos from the Houston Astrodome. And you know what? They're very comfortable.
When was the last time you sat in one of them?
Oh, probably yesterday.
Do you
Yeah.
watch games sitting in them? Do you have a TV in front of you?
No, no, no. I had these grand designs to put TVs in here, and then we realized, like, you have a TV right here, so you've got monitors and you can do everything. No, I will relax in my chair when I need to get away from my desk. It's like, you know, my study, if you will.
Study, but not man cave. Because if it was a man cave,
Exactly.
you'd have the television. So okay, you're relaxing in one of those chairs. Are you visualizing what's? Are you running through what the tailgate scene is going to be like tomorrow when you're there for UT?
Yeah, we got to get our priorities straight. So, as we get older, we realize that the events surrounding the game are significantly more important than what happens on the field. I tell my kids this all the time, like it's a privilege to be able to play in these big games because of the events surrounding them. And hopefully we get to play in a big game down the road. My kids especially have been much more fortunate than I was. I grew up in Houston, Texas, and we were awful. I mean, there was a very legitimate curse of the Astrodome. It's something that we feel is very real, and the sins committed by Judge Roy Hoffines and his team by creating AstroTurf, which led to numerous injuries, cast a curse similar to, the Billy Goat curse in Chicago or the curse of Bambino in Boston. There's a curse of the turf. And I grew up around the curse of the turf. And even when my teams growing up in Houston won titles, they all had asterisks associated with them, right? So when the Rockets finally won titles in
It's a
94,
good point.
95, everybody said, wait a minute, time out. Jordan was checked out. I'll remind everybody that Michael Jordan played in 1995, and the Rockets were 5-1 against Jordan in the Olajuwon years. The Bulls had no answer for Olajuwon. Bill Cartwright couldn't hold Akeem's jock. Who would have
That's
beaten
true.
them? And my friends will say one of the reasons why Jordan retired, tongue in cheek, one of the reasons why Jordan retired is scared of the Rockets. Jordan couldn't play against Vernon Maxwell. We would have won one of those. So fast forward to 2017, when my other team won a championship, the Houston Astros. I don't have to tell you what has happened. So the curse of the turf has continued on with my other teams winning their championships. So now people will say, yeah, you have rings, but
Yeah.
they have asterisks, but they can't take away 2022 from us.
Well,
So anyway,
that's what I was gonna say. The latest Astros World Series. This was after the sign
exactly.
stealing.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you made it sound like here we're going to start feeling sorry for you, but you then just at the very end you slip that in. Oh, but we won not too long ago and we weren't necessarily cheating.
Yeah.
So now
Yeah.
I'm thinking to myself, Do I feel sorry for a guy
No,
when I'm from San Diego and the Chargers are gone, the Clippers left, all there's left would be the Padres, and the Padres haven't been to the World Series since 1998. I was going to be feeling sorry for you, but then I realized, well, wait a minute,
don't.
I have it worse off. But you talked about your time at the Astrodome. The way the ball would bounce on that, unlike anything else, what do you remember from the way that like a chopper hit up the
Yeah.
middle? Like, what is that like? The
I mean,
ball off the AstroTurf.
look, I lean more into helmets and limbs bouncing off the turf. I was fortunate enough to do a documentary about the Astrodome a few years ago for MLB Network and interviewed a lot of people, including Dan Pastorini, who was the Oilers quarterback. And you ask anybody about those original artificial surfaces, and it was just a tiny little layer of this synthetic grass on top of cement, and it was awful. And so yes, you'd have like a routine, grounder that would bounce over the third baseman. But think about playing on that. Look at Earl Campbell today, or look at some of these players who played at Riverfront Stadium, or Three Rivers, in Pittsburgh on that synthetic turf. And it was not meant to be. We were not supposed to abuse our bodies on that surface. And yeah, it was wrong, and you see that we've had different machinations of turf. We're going back from grass to the new turf, and we're seeing injuries that happen there. They haven't gotten it perfect. And it all goes back to the Astrodome in 1965 when they tried to go grow grass in the dome and didn't think about the fact that it wouldn't work. So they had to put turf down. And that's it.
But
But you shouldn't feel sorry for me. I've had a very good run, especially with the Astros lately.
yeah, and you said curse earlier in this conversation. I'm thinking, is it a curse, or is it just that you were taking championships away because of the turf?
Well,
Is it
well,
the
well,
turf's fault, not a curse?
yeah, it's the turf's fault because it was, and so going really into the curse of the turf, and this is an idea for sale if anybody wants to fund it. Um, the Astros were a star-crossed organization. Unlike a lot of teams, in that era, several of the star players either died or had debilitating injuries. Don Wilson, the star of the team, who pitched two no-hitters in the early 70s, he died mysteriously. You had Cesar Cedeno, who was supposed to be the next Willie Mays. He had a crazy story about a murder in the Caribbean that really derailed his career. Bob Aspromani, one of the original Astros, he died. J.R. Richard, at the height of his career, suffered a stroke and was not able to come back. Dickie Thon, who was a shortstop that was supposed to be the next great player, got beamed in the eye and was never the same. So there was all of these examples which gave fodder to the curse of the turf, specifically to the Astros. Then you had the Oilers, the Buffalo Bills game, which happened, the 35-point lead that was blown by the Oilers. So a lot of us Houstonians really and truly believe that this thing was real. And the only way to get out of the curse of the turf was to leave the dome and play in other stadiums. And so the Astros left in 2000, the Oilers left and went to Tennessee. Um, but look, the Oilers, Tennessee Titans, you know, 1 yard line in the Super Bowl 20 years ago. Maybe that was the curse of the turf. I don't know.
Against the greatest show on turf
Exactly.
that they lost
Exactly.
to, as we keep with the theme. And you said curse. I think you have to think this curse that you are mentioning in just this way. It gives you good fodder for a story.
Totally.
And so you are in the business of storytelling. So I think about what you've done storytelling wise with the Houston Astros and all that they've gone through. You got to thank the curse for giving you this documentary, that this feature that you put out there. And I would have to imagine that part of it is for you and to be a cathartic release of your own internal demons surrounding what's happened to that franchise over the years, where you're putting this product out there, and this has to be a way for you to free yourself from the shackles of the dread and the pain of being an Astros fan.
Yeah, well, to be fair, the documentary came out before the scandal. So the documentary was more of an homage to my childhood and stuff like that.
Sure.
So um, you know, I I believe that the story of 2017 and the sign stealing scandal will be told in due time when certain non-disclosures have expired, when people aren't worried about it, because it's a much bigger story than just what was happening in Houston. It was like, it was something endemic to baseball, and baseball has its own demons and its own, buried bodies. Cheating and stealing in baseball, goes back over 100 years, right? We're fundamentally aware of that. And so I think that story needs to be told. It needs to be told, hopefully by me and our company, because we would bring a very unique firsthand POV to it. But it's something that was very visceral. It was very real. I experienced it with my dad and my son. So we had three generations of Reeves men at those games, and so you can't take away the emotions that we felt in 2017 and tell me it was tainted, because those feelings are very real. I certainly, have sympathy for the teams that were affected by it, but I would also ask those same people to challenge themselves and say, "Are you sure the Astros are the only ones doing that? Are you like,
Correct.
in the whole scheme of baseball, really just one team was doing it?" Now, it's probably pretty similar to Lance Armstrong and that, and the Astros were probably doing it worse and more, better, whatever you want to call it, than others. So I get that, but I think that the real story will come out, and the real story will reveal that this was a systemic baseball issue. The Astros just did it better than others.
Yeah, maybe they got a little too prideful in not covering their tracks as much as others, or they went a little bit overt, more overt than the others. But you said it. They're at that stage of the game where they were in that time period, 2017. They by no means were the only team that was engaging in some form of nefarious activity. If you were to be the one to document what happened in 2017 with your team, the Texas Crew Productions, where you are president and director, how would you start the series?
Yeah, I would start it, in the present day, whenever that present day is. And I would really start it with Jose Altuve. Um, Jose Altuve should be the poster child for what could be in sports. Jose Altuve is 5'5" on a good day. He's one of the greatest overachievers in the history of baseball. He wasn't supposed to be there. He kept banging his head against the wall and trying and trying and trying and trying. And he finally made it to the big leagues. And he's been an all-star ever since. And because of the cheating scandal, he's become the face of the scandal. I've been to road games, where he's booed mercilessly, and he deals with it all. He deals with it all with, however he does it. And oftentimes it motivates him to, you know, excel in those visiting ballparks. But in the community of Houston, as a role model for kids out there, he should be the face of the major leagues. The things that he does, like I said, in the community of Houston, is unbelievable. And the fact that this guy has done what he's done at his size needs to be celebrated. And instead, he's vilified for something that he really wasn't even a part of. Now, granted, he was the captain of the team and he was on it, but if you go back and look at the metrics of the cheating scandal and you read the stories, Altuve's numbers were completely flatlined. Everybody would say he didn't want the trash cans. You can listen to the audio, like there was no banging trash cans. Now, the flip side of that is if George Springer or Marwin Gonzalez or Yuli Gurriel or Evan Gattis and those guys batting in front of him or behind him were taking the bangs, then he indirectly benefits from that. So he's not absolved because he was there and he knew what was happening, but he needs to be understood and honored for his achievements. And so I would start with Altuve because he's the face of the franchise. And he's been the most victimized by it. He couldn't go anywhere else. Like a couple of years ago when he signed his contract, he couldn't have gotten $300 million and gone to San Diego or LA or New
Yeah.
York. They wouldn't have done it. And it's great. He gets to stay in Houston, but yeah, the story is with him. And so it'd be, in a perfect world, it would time out with is Altuve a first ballot Hall of Famer or is he not? And maybe you tie that into it, and and that would give enough time to do it 5 years after his retirement. So it's probably like 7 years. Yeah, makes sense.
I think what you just said there, if there was a Dodger fan that watched that response, their blood pressure went to an all-time high
Yeah,
because they have some certain sentiments about that guy you just mentioned in Altuve
yeah,
that might differ from
yeah,
you, but that's why we have you on, and that's
yeah,
why we want your perspective. And if we
yeah.
were to get your perspective, Chip, in your twist on how you like to end your features, the series you do, what does that look like?
Well, specifically with something like this, I mean, look, it's not unlike anything else. We are storytellers, and so we need to educate people, right? With something new and different, right? So in any story that's done well, it's not a book report. We're not relitigating facts. We're not just telling you a cool story, but we're giving you new information and oftentimes some closure to some story. So, Brian and the Boz is a really good example of that, in that we were able to allow closure with Bosworth, with his alma mater, OU, with his coach, um, with his children, getting to educate his children on things, and then ultimately with himself and his relationship with his father. So a lot of what we did in that documentary, Brian the Boz, was personal for him that he needed, but it was also an opportunity to educate everyone on what he was dealing with, what he was going through, and you learn something about Brian in that process. And so that's the responsibility for any of these things. There's a million cool stories out there, um, but we have an obligation to um, provide something new and unique to people out there. Because why else are you going to watch it? You can go watch this stuff on TikTok and Instagram and see the exact same stuff. So you 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 got to make sure you're doing something different.
What do you get out of all this?
Um, yeah, I think it varies, right? I mean, I I get gratitude more than anything, I guess. I never thought about what I was going to do in life or become or get a chance to do or be, or so I'm not really one that deals with that in the moment. And so that's why it's kind of a tricky question. I'll tell you a story about we did a documentary on the Field of Dreams for Fox Sports a couple years ago, and uh, and it was really about fathers and sons, right? So the premise, like, what do we do differently? Again, Field of Dreams, like, how do you tell the story differently? We made it about fathers and sons, and we interviewed. We went to Dyersville, Iowa, where the field is, and did a bunch of man on the streets interviews. And so we posited around fathers and sons, and so we that was an ongoing theme. Um, and I had a lot of people reach out to me, um, and tell me how significant that was for them. I was crying. It was like people that were in it, people that weren't. And so you don't think about those things in the moment, but you appreciate the fact that on some small level, even if it's just one or two people, that you're able to impact somebody in some way. Um, I just do it because I like it. I like learning about things. I like writing about things. I like diving into stories and peeling back the onion and figuring out why, like, and so if there's something beyond that, then that's gravy, and that is a outlet to have gratitude about something.
Growing up, what was your relationship like with your father in those moments of childhood innocence?
Um, Trying to think of when my childhood innocence was evaporated. Um,
It's still going.
yeah. No, I mean, look, my dad and I spent a lot of time in the Astrodome. I mean, like, part of that is an homage to my dad. And going to baseball games with my dad, going to Oilers games with my dad. It was like that was where we really connected. And I've gotten a chance to do that with my own kids. Um, you know, through Little League and soccer and everything else. I mean, but the loss of innocence, yeah, I don't know. It probably happened pretty early. I was I probably was jaded earlier than most. So, I, you know,
Here-
a long time ago, I would say.
Here's the
It
thing,
probably it
though.
probably had a lot to do with the Oilers. Let's put it that way.
Sure, and then when they left and all that
Yeah.
down in the 90s or so. But you say jaded. I see that it has the feelings of a sense of humor that like you say you
Well, none of
had
this is
like
important. I mean,
yeah,
we're not splitting atoms or, curing any, diseases here. So you know, I'm appreciative. I mean, I get to be on your podcast talking about sports documentaries and myself, and so I'm very appreciative of it. But I also can contextualize where I am and what I get the good fortune to do as a profession versus like what some of my, colleagues do, or people that I really admire. I had a friend who was valedictorian of his class who was trying to become an astronaut. Like, that's some real shit. And so all of this is just an honor and a privilege. But I will say this, and this may be a tangent to what you asked, but it's something that I think is important. You know, we're at an inflection point for documentaries, and a lot of what you see out there today um, is kind of curated stuff, and it's all great. The filmmakers do a wonderful job, but it's curated by the streamers, the networks, because we as consumers don't want to take a risk and go watch like a 30 for 30 on Butch Reynolds or Michael Chang or the Stolen Gold one that just came out. Real pieces of journalism. They would rather double down with another Tom Brady story or another LeBron James story. And so I worry that we're going to lose our momentum in the documentary space because the buyers are going to be risk averse to um, taking chances on true journalism. And that scares me a little bit. And the reason it scares me is because documentaries, in a lot of ways, are the last bit of news opportunities that a lot of the younger generation have, right? They're not reading newspapers, they're not watching the news, but they will watch unscripted content. And so there is a higher responsibility on filmmakers out there than there ever has been to make sure that your ethos is in the right direction, that you are not getting persuaded by some other force out there that is dictating what your storytelling looks like. And so that is something that is a little unnerving in our industry right now.
You don't reckon that there will be a burnout to thinking that way?
I do think that's going to happen. I 1,000% think that there is going to be a flip, and people are going to say, you know what? I just spent 4 hours watching this documentary, and everything that I just saw is on a TikTok feed.
Or I already knew. Yeah.
Instagram. I
Mhm.
already knew all that stuff. And for me, like The Last Dance was amazing, but it wasn't revelatory for me because I lived it, right? And so I just, I challenge the directors out there to keep pushing the networks for these wonderful ideas. I challenge the networks and streamers to not take risks with some of these great ideas that are out there. And I think you're right, Brian. I do think we're going to get to a point where, like, I love LeBron. It's great, but I know all that. Let's move on.
Uh, With The Last Dance, and you brought that up, and Chip Reeves is with behind Brian Fenley. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the journalistic integrity of that series, because here you have Michael speaking and he's there, but he is essentially, I would have to imagine, everything that's in the cutting room, editing, that he's consenting over whether that goes on the air or not. So you're getting one behind the scenes look of his perspective, but is it enough perspectives of him to call that true journalism?
Well, I mean, look, so I obviously wasn't in any of those meetings. I know some of the people that worked on it. And I don't know whether MJ had editorial control on that or not. I just don't. Um, it's up to, I mean, I've always positioned my responsibility when I'm interviewing somebody is saying, look, I'm going to ask you the questions. I'm pretty good at interviewing people. If I get the answers that you don't want to give me in the course of the interview, that's on you. You should be, you know, coached up, professional enough to say whatever it is that you want to say. And if you reveal something to me in the course of the interview, then it must be true, and I'm going to run with it. So, I'm sure MJ was pretty good. MJ's been around a lot. He's done a lot of interviews. He's probably really good at saying what needs to be said. So he probably a lot of his editing was probably internal, if I had to guess.
Yeah, because obviously there are others that had contrasting viewpoints to some
Of
of
course.
the ways the perception of
Yeah,
how
yeah, yeah.
things worked out.
Yeah.
You talk about like Scottie Pippen, but I want to leave you with this, and I feel like Chip, we're going to do a part two here because there's still so much I want to get to. So we're going to have to do a part two at some point. But what has to go through your grading rubric to make a good interview?
Well, um, the first thing is don't don't go to your notes. your notes are there as a security blanket. They're there for when I just said when you're changing tapes. When you're changing
Old school.
cards or there's a break, you go look at your notes and you make a couple. But like as soon as you lose this, you lose them.
Yes.
And it's really, really, really important to know your material, know where you want to go, to make sure you're having a conversation with somebody, to engage with them and not have it feel like an interview. I know it's a cliche, but if you're good at it, all the noise just vanishes and it's just you and I having a conversation. Um, and there's an art to that, but the art begins with knowing your shit.
So how would you grade this interview?
It
Be
was great.
real.
I talked way too much.
You have a
Yeah.
lot of good information.
You did great. I would have cut me off at some
Oh,
point in
stop.
time. Yeah. So my apologies there. I
No, no. But this means we're gonna have to do a part two
Sure.
because I would love to have you on again to I love it because we're kind of going philosophical, we're kind of going existential, and this is right in my wheelhouse. And I like your humor too. I feel like you talked about somehow you've turned this in using your words, this cynicism or this jaded like feeling, and you've actually procured that into your sense of humor. So and I think it's pretty cool. So Chip, this has been so fun. We're gonna do a part two at some point. I appreciate you so much for
Yeah.
being a part
No
of
problem,
this.
Brian. Yeah, that's what. Thank you for having me.